if I told you a small country in West Africa is doing something most nations are too scared to try? What if I told you this country once begged for money and now it is starting to say no? This is Ghana, the first country south of the Sahara to win its freedom back in 1957. For a long time, the world saw Ghana as poor, as a country that needed help, as a country that takes orders. But something is changing, and very few people outside Africa are watching it happen. This is the story of how Ghana fell into debt and how it is now trying to climb out on its own terms. In 1957, Ghana made history. It became the first nation in sub-Saharan Africa to break free from colonial rule. The whole continent watched. Ghana was a spark, but freedom on paper is not the same as freedom in your pockets. Ghana has gold under its ground. It has cocoa, the bean that becomes the chocolate in your kitchen. It has oil under its sea. By any normal measure, this should be a rich country. And yet, for decades, Ghana kept falling into the same trap. It will borrow money, the money will run low, it will borrow again. Banks from outside the country, the IMF, the World Bank, they will step in, but the help always comes with rules attached. Cut government spending, sell off state companies, open the markets wide, follow our plan, or we cut off the cash. This is not a secret. Economists have a name for it, a structural adjustment. It happened across Africa in the 1980s and the 90s. Roads got built, but hospitals got smaller budgets. Schools lost teachers. Millions of ordinary people paid the price for debts they never chose to take on. In December 2024, Ghana went to the polls. They chose John Dramani Mahama as their president. It was not his first time in the job. He had led the country before from 2012 to 2017. This time, he came back to a nation in crisis. He took office in January 2025 and he inherited a hard truth: the debt restructuring work. The slow, painful process of fixing Ghana's loans had already started under the previous government. Mahama did not invent the rescue plan, but he chose something important. He chose to keep walking the path instead of tearing it up. That single choice mattered. It kept the IMF on board. It kept investors from running, and then, slowly, the numbers began to move. Let's talk about gold. For years, small-scale miners in Ghana sold their gold through informal channels. Much of it left the country quietly, off the books with little benefit to the state. So the government built something new: Gold Board, one central body to buy and export gold from small miners, bringing a hidden trade out into the land. In its first month, Gold Board moved more than 55 tons of gold, worth close to $5 billion. That is the real money, finally counted, finally taxed, finally working for the country that mined it. Remember the chocolate problem? Beans live cheap, candy comes back dear. Ghana is trying to close that gap. The government has proposed a new cocoa bill with a simple promise: farmers should get 70% of the world market price for their beans, not whatever a middleman feels like offering. And there's a bigger target behind it: process at least half of Ghana's cocoa inside the country instead of shipping it out raw. That means more factories, more jobs in Ghana, not just in Belgium or Switzerland. More of the chocolate money staying where the cocoa actually grows. It is a small shift on paper, a few percentage points here, a new law there, but step back and you can see what it really is: a country declining to stop being just a farm for someone else's factory. Ghana's oil story has also gone quiet. Years of disputes between the government and oil companies has kept away new investments. Production was sliding. One of Mahama's first moves was to pull back a controversial order that had forced two separate oil fields to merge against the wishes of their operators. A fact that has frozen confidence in the sector for years. The result? Oil companies came back to the table. Licenses for major fields were extended out of 2040. New wells started drilling, and in Tema, a refinery that had sat idle for years restored, processing crude oil again after a long sleep. None of this makes headlines outside Ghana, but inside the country, it is the quiet work of rebuilding trust. One contract, one well, one functioning refinery at a time. Here's something that most of the world missed: the headquarters of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The agreement meant to turn Africa's 54 countries into one giant market sits in Accra. That is not an accident. Ghana has been pushing to become the place where African trade rules get written, instead of just a country that follows rules written somewhere else. And in March 2026, Ghana took this further. At the United Nations, it led a resolution calling for the world to formally recognize the transatlantic slave trade as a crime against humanity, to take reparations seriously, not as charity, but as justice for centuries of stolen wealth and stolen labor. President Mahama put it plainly to the world: this is not a request for a handout. It is a demand for what was taken to be accounted for. You can agree or disagree with how far that argument should go, but you cannot say it isn't bold. A country that spent decades being told what to do by richer nations is now standing in front of those same nations and asking hard questions out loud. So where does this leave Ghana? Not in paradise. Let's be honest about that. Debt is still high. Many Ghanaians have not yet felt the good economic numbers in their daily lives. Growth has come mostly from gold and oil. Industries that bring in money but do not create jobs. The real test is still ahead. Can this growth turn into work, into wages, into a better life for the person selling tomatoes by the roadside? But something has shifted that is harder to measure than GDP. Ghana stopped only asking for help. It started asking why it needed to ask it all. It built an institution to capture gold value that used to vanish. It is writing laws to keep more cocoa profits at home. It mended fences with oil investors instead of fighting them. It put itself at the center of Africa's biggest trade project, and it stood up at the United Nations and demanded the history books get corrected. This is not a fairy tale where every plan works. Some, like part of the Gold for Oil program, clearly did not. But the direction is the story. A country choosing to build its own table instead of waiting for a seat at someone else's. Ghana's story is not finished. It may not even be at the halfway point, but for the first time in a long time, the next chapter is being written more in Accra and a little less in Washington, London, or Beijing. If Ghana finds a way to turn this momentum into real life for its people, not just better numbers, but better days, it will not just be Ghana's win. It will be a signal to every nation that was told it could only follow and never lead. What do you think? Can Ghana turn this progress into a future its own people can feel and not just read about in a report? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more honest stories about Africa told without the old stereotypes, subscribe so the next one can find you. My name is Blessing Chris. See you in the next one.